Rawand Mustafa is a Palestinian Syrian writer who grew up in Canada and now lives in the United States. She received her MA in English and Creative Writing from the University of Windsor. Rawand's debut collection, Umbilical Discord, won the 2024 Etel Adnan Poetry Prize from the University of Arkansas Press. It's a poetry collection unlike any other I encountered this year, in that, amid numerous searing and gorgeous poems, it incorporates testimonies by elder Palestinian women who have witnessed and survived the ongoing Nakba, or catastrophe, of 1948. I randomly received this book in my mailbox a few months ago, but I've long been a fan of the Etel Adnan Prize, and I was eager to speak to Rawand and learn about her beautiful writing. This interview was co-hosted by dear friend Kathleen Sullivan. Kathleen Sullivan is a writer and translator originally from New York. She has a BA in Middle Eastern, South Asian, and African Studies from Columbia University and is an MFA candidate in literary translation at the University of Arkansas, focusing on translating fiction from Arabic into English. She is the translation editor of the Arkansas International and the director of Arkansas's Writers in the Schools program. Tell me more about your grad school experience and how you came to be interested in pursuing poetry.
My grad experience was amazing, honestly. It was really nice to go from my undergrad at U Windsor right into the grad program. So familiar faces, the professors, great writers. It was very nice. And I feel like it was at the grad level where I really grew as a writer, like exponentially. Just sort of events that took place and courses I took and books I read really influenced my writing, especially my thesis project, which would become my book, Umbilical Discord. So it was really a phenomenal experience for me. Yeah.
And how did you get your start in translation?
Honestly, it was this project. It was the first time that I was translating. I don't even think I can call myself a translator. I'm sure maybe you, Kathleen, could talk more about, translation as its own kind of. But this project, really the crux of it was translating these stories of elder Palestinian women to work with those stories in my own writing. So it was really the beginning for me. Hopefully not the end, but yeah, that was my first dose of translating.
So it's been a couple months since you released this book. Have you translated anything else since?
I haven't. It's been a very busy time for me, just, personal things going on. I recently got married and moved and so many events taking place, but I hope to get back into it. And the nice thing is that, there's no shortage of material like that I used for a book like this, no shortage of stories, especially nowadays, I guess you can say with the sort of global reach that social media has. So many stories to be translated and sort of expressed in different voices. So I hope to in the future, but not working on anything at the moment.
It sounds from the afterward that this kind of project was a bit of a group project. You had some of your family members involved. Can you talk a little bit about how that process worked?
Yeah, that was a lot of the fun for me, was reaching out to my mom, to my aunt, my uncles, not only to help with the translating because it was a struggle. I'm sure Kathleen, you can relate, maybe. It's not an easy task to, especially for me, with no experience prior, and Palestinian Arabic is its own kind of Arabic too that I'm not really familiar with. I'm more of like a Syrian dialect. So it was a struggle to translate, and I had to reach out to some English speaking relatives to help out a little bit, but also just to use the stories of some of my family members, I think was important because the book, it's really about the Palestinian context, which for me involves so many threads. It involves the Syrian context. It involves a context that my mom grew up in, even though she has never been to Palestine either. It involves the story of my aunt, who also a Syrian refugee who had to go flee to Egypt and then to Europe in a refugee boat. That to me is still part of the Palestinian context. So it's important to me to incorporate those stories alongside the testimonies of the elder Palestinian women.
You also mentioned that the process was sometimes frustrating and thankless. I wonder if you could speak a bit about how you managed to persist despite those negative emotions.
Yeah, I mean, at times it did get really frustrating, even in like the document that I had for the translations, where I had like two columns for the English and for the Arabic. Many of the times I would have sort of like placeholder question marks in the English side, or like literally in brackets, like, I don't know what she's saying. I'm getting frustrated. I can't understand her. Or I'll have like maybe like the transliteration of a word that I couldn't quite understand. So the process was frustrating, yes. And like I said, I did have to reach out for help. And I was so close to like hiring a translator, but I tried to push through and do as much as I could. And I think besides reaching out for help, which was necessary, it was also like a rewarding process to hear these stories and grasp what I could grasp, you know? Like as I listened to these stories, I was sort of like building this idea of Palestine in my head that I never had before. It was pretty exciting. I would like write down lists of like all the food that was mentioned, all the drinks that were mentioned, the animals, the plants. It was just like building this world in my head, you know? So I think that helped push through the struggles of the translation.
It seems like there's a few words throughout the collection that you left in Arabic, which I thought was such an interesting decision. Can you talk through your thinking behind that and how that evolved?
Yeah, I think for the most part, the words that I kept in Arabic were names of places in Palestine, but also elsewhere. And the importance there is just to counter sort of the erasure of those Palestinian villages and their Arabic names. So to keep that original Arabic, I think was important for me. Some of the other words I wanted to keep in Arabic were kind of like very Palestinian to me, like Issa or Yamma, Yaba. They stood out to me as like different in the Palestinian dialect, so I wanted to preserve those as well. And I think part of the effect of keeping those words in Arabic, especially the places, is that when you get to the end of the book and there's that members list, I think it's a little bit like a shock, you know, because I think as you're reading, especially for a non-Arabic speaking or reading person, you sort of gloss over the Arabic if you don't know how to read Arabic, right? Same thing like if in English there's a word I don't know how to pronounce, I'll like gloss over it and keep reading. So when people do that, I think it's easy to like not focus on those names, not remember them, obviously. So when you get to that members list, it's like, oh my goodness, like this many, places were named throughout the book, and you kind of want to go back and like check them out again. And so I think that's also a secondary effect to keeping them in Arabic.
Could you maybe just talk a bit about the process of like how you went about the project? It sounds like you translated the passages from the archive first, then interspersed your writing and stories from your family. How did each column inform the other?
Right. Yeah, the whole writing process, I mean, it started as, trying to get a hold of as many of these testimonies as I could by Palestinian women who witnessed the Nakba. And then it was a matter of translating the material that needed translating. Excuse me. And then I think the scariest part was to start, after that point, incorporating my own writing because of, well, what do I have to say? Listening to all these women speak their stories, I felt so like small, like, me living in the diaspora, never stepping foot in Palestine. What do I have to say about the Palestinian context? But I eventually, I started first, and the writing process was more reactionary to those testimonies. So the perspective on that left column, left justified column, which embodies, I would say, my perspective as a diasporic Palestinian. So I would basically kind of react to what I was listening to. If I heard something that made me think of Syria, or if I would question what I was listening to, that was very much the beginning of the writing process. And as I went on, it became a little bit easier to sort of blend the left justified column with these right justified testimonies, and to sort of go back and forth with either my own stories or my family's stories, wherever I saw that there was an effective juxtaposition or complementary kind of interaction going on, that came out more in the later poems.
And just to take a step back, when did you sort of decide that you wanted to structure this as contrapuntals?
I think, I mean, if I can go back and like talk about the whole process of coming up with this book to begin with, that might inform my answer here. But essentially, a series of events led to the conception of this book, beginning with the Sheikh Jarrah protests in 2021, which is when I started my grad degree. And so these protests sort of blew up on social media and worldwide Palestinian solidarity protests. And it was my first kind of like awakening of, wow, this is a present context going on around me that I honestly didn't have much knowledge about. So that was the first thing. And then I came across, through these protests, Mohammed al-Kurd, who I mentioned, who was an activist, a writer. He was part of one of the families experiencing expulsion in Sheikh Jarrah. And so I followed him on social media, and I read his book, his debut book of poetry that came out in 2022. That was a big step in sort of experiencing like a Palestinian expressing their perspectives, and also including Arabic here and there. That was a first for me and very interesting. And because I followed Al-Kurd on social media now, one day he posted on his Instagram story a video or a link to a video. So I click on it and I see Nazmiya Al-Kilani and this elder Palestinian woman who looks like my grandmother, and she starts talking about Safad, which is the place where my grandparents are from. And I start crying. I'm bawling. And I don't even know why, but I think it's just because I realized I don't know anything about Safad or Palestine or these places that both sides of the family, they're from there. So I listened to her testimony, and as she's speaking, I'm thinking, as she says, oh, we had a garden like this and a house like this, I start thinking of the only thing that I can relate to, which is like our home in Syria, So it's like, why is it that this is my reality, that's her reality? And so this kind of back and forth happens as I'm watching this video. And I think that kind of gave me the idea to go with that structure of, my own perspectives, living in the diaspora, never setting foot in Palestine, with the perspectives of these Palestinian women. So that was the big inspiration there for the structure.
Do you write in any other forms? Like what is your relationship to poetic form in general?
It's very open, I think. I don't restrict myself to this form. This one, yeah, the most recent one, I guess I've been sort of experimenting with, just because it's so fascinating to think that you could take anything, you could take any story or like a conversation you had with someone and go about, attempting a form like this, where it's like a back and forth conversation, yet there's a disconnect, yet there's a connection, So it's a very fun form to explore. But other than that, I kind of just have a free form in my poetry, I would say.
What was the process like taking something that wasn't originally expressed as poetry and then turning it into poetry?
I think it made me realize that some of the simplest phrasing or words or conversations can have such a profound poetic effect if, structured in a certain way or, combined with another voice, could have that effect, which was very beautiful. And I think that translating these testimonies and trying to incorporate them into poetry, it really emphasized for me the importance of storytelling in poetry, which is not always the case. Sometimes, not all poetry is storytelling, but it opened the genre of poetry for me to include almost like a prose-like narrative storytelling. So that was also an aspect of poetry that I think opened up throughout this project.
I think one of my favorite things about the book is the moments where your text on the left-hand column sort of mirrors or echoes the translated text. And I'm curious, how did that sort of come about? Was that like how intentional was that? Did it develop over time?
Yeah, those are my favorite parts too. I think they comes out most in the last two poems, which makes sense because when I started this project, again, it was so I didn't even know what would happen or how I was going to go about doing this. I was just like so immersed in the translation. But when I actually started writing, I was a bit restrictive where I would only focus on a testimony by one woman for the entire poem. That was like the case for the first two poems. The third poem was from multiple women's perspectives. However, they were all from the same village. But for the last two poems, after I had gone through the translation material so many times, I gave myself a bit more freedom of sort of picking and choosing the excerpts from multiple accounts, from multiple places, where I saw that they would best complement the left justified column. So that's why there's a bit more flow overlap between the two columns, which I think sort of reflects, like a stronger connection being built between those two perspectives.
I'm curious if you could talk a little bit more like logistically, how did you stay organized between having like source material and then your own poetry? Just like how did you actually tackle that?
It was very chaotic at times. There was a lot of material to work with. And it was different types of material. So not all of it was just like, a video testimony where I just had to write down what I heard. Some of it was like videos that also included subtitles, but those subtitles I had to adjust a bit here and there. Some of them were text-only testimonies, but it was only in Arabic, so I had to translate the whole thing. Some of it was text only, but English and Arabic, but the English was missing chunks of the Arabic. So it was a whole different sources to work with. So I tried to, like I said, I just had like a chart with two columns, like a translation document, two columns, English and Arabic, and I tried to sort of separate each testimony that way. But like I said before, some of it was very like, I would have placeholders here, question marks here, not quite sure what they're saying here, need to come back to this here. It wasn't as clean and straightforward as I hoped it would be. But as I went through the material over and over and over again, I sort of got into a rhythm where I knew where things were and I could pull things where I wanted them. And so it got easier over time, but it was very chaotic in the beginning.
On a similar note, how did you decide which pieces from the archive to convert to poetry? And how did you go about choosing from such a vast database?
Yeah, that was the first overwhelming hurdle to get over. I think from the beginning though, because the first video I saw was Nazmia's video, I was sort of drawn to sort of her stories like as a mother and taking care of her kids and her perspectives in that way. So I think I knew in the beginning that I wanted to stick to these testimonies by the elder Palestinian women, just related more to my situation and that first video. So I wanted to stick to those testimonies. And that was the first thing I did. I tried to make a list of all of the testimonies, video form, text form, everything on the website by Palestinian women. And I just started going through them one by one. And I think I was just forced to stop at some point because my document was getting way too long and I had to start writing my own, poetry at some point. So I just had to stop, but not without like feeling like in my gut, like if I just listened to one more testimony, I would have gotten like the most illuminating, piece of the Palestinian puzzle. But I had to stop it somewhere. So
Out of curiosity, were you able to get in touch with any of the people whose work was in the archive?
I haven't, no, that's something actually that I've been thinking about that I want to try and do. I tried to get in touch with the Zochrot team, the website that I used where I used the testimony material, but they didn't reach back. So maybe I'll try reaching out again now that the book is out, but no, unfortunately, haven't gotten in contact.
I just want to celebrate the title and how unique it is. My dog also wants to celebrate. Can we talk a bit about the title and how you arrived at it?
Yeah, absolutely. I love this story. I'm so happy you asked. So basically, during my graduate studies, of course, I was working on the project and I was just stuck on the title. And it was Ramadan, okay? And so I just finished a whole day of fasting. And I don't know about you, but after fasting and you finish eating and then you tidy up and everything, that's my time for like a nice iced coffee. So I make my iced coffee and the first sip kind of just like, whoosh. I hope you understand the feeling or you can relate to it. And as soon as I took that sip, it kind of just came to me. That was the moment that it happened. But of course, I mean, the name itself, I'm sure it came from somewhere deeper than that. But I think it just speaks to there's an obvious like maternal connection throughout the book. These are specifically Palestinian women, mothers, grandmothers, great-grandmothers, who I chose to focus on. So there's that maternal connection, but there's also a disconnect with me and these women, both in time and space. And so I think the discord kind of speaks to that disconnect and also like discord in sort of like a musical or just like, thinking about sound. It's kind of like different sounds happening at the same time, different things going on at the same time, sort of in a dissonant way. And I think that kind of reflects the multiple voices and stories and perspectives. And so I think it aptly, describes what's going on in the book.
It's definitely a perfect title.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I second that. And related to what you were just saying, we notice that, throughout the book, obviously there's a lot of violence, but there's also many mentions of pregnancy and childbirth. And the contrast is just really interesting. So I wondered if you could speak a little bit to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that goes back again to that maternal sort of theme throughout, where I think, giving birth or birth, I guess, generally is it's a symbol of hope, a new life, of course. But at the same time, like you said, some of those scenes were kind of violent and heartbreaking. And I think that sort of summarizes the state of the Palestinian, whether in the diaspora or living in occupied Palestine, who is in constant state of hope and heartbreak, you know? And I think also generally, I mean, Palestinian women giving birth is a form of resistance in its own way. Making more Palestinians is definitely an act of resistance. And so I think I wanted that theme to be prevalent throughout. But like you said, there's the two sides of it for sure.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the line, "Who owns the tenses?" What does that mean to you both as a poet and also someone, who is thinking about this in a more scholarly way?
Right. I think it speaks to generally the power of language. You know, when you have someone in charge or an owner of the tenses, so to speak, they can control the narrative. They can, you know, either speak the truth or create sort of a propaganda to mask that truth. And so when we question things like, is this a matter of the past? What is the relevance now? Then these questions sort of turn on very big, important questions about the truth and what is true about this context. And so in writing, and I remember I was looking at one of the inspirations for Umbilical Discord is this book, Rifka by Muhammad al-Kurd. And he mentions in it that in speaking about his late grandmother, who the book is named after and dedicated to, he had a problem with tenses, you know? You almost don't want to write certain things in the past tense. And so in this book, while for the accounts from the Palestinian women, I kept them in the past tense as they recounted their stories. I tried to keep my perspectives more in the present because I am in the present, sort of working through these past testimonial material. And so I guess it's just a general call to make the Palestinian context present as opposed to something of the past.
You do so many fascinating things with language and grammar throughout. Can you talk a bit about how you make language function as a carrier, as you write on page 10
Yeah.
with the quote, Palestine felt like a past participle. I am trying to present it.
Right, yeah. I mean, that again speaks a little bit to, who owns the tenses, right? Language can have that effect of really making an entire context appear either, like I said, something of the past or relevant now and important now. And, language as a carrier, I think this whole project was just a really deep dive into language because that's the only thing I have left, right, of my connection to Palestine, these stories from these women. And so that's what I clung to. So it's almost as if this is the carrier, bringing me the remains of Palestine, I guess, in my memory. So in that way, yeah, language really acted like that bridge that I'm trying to cross and get back to the Palestine that I have neglected for so long, I guess.
There's also a lot of play with prefixes throughout. I wondered if you could speak in particular about D and re throughout, like DE and RE throughout the book and maybe throughout your writing process.
Yeah, I think, I mean, it all started with Discord, kind of like that wordplay there, where I started to think about the connection or disconnection that could happen within a word itself. And so, especially with remember, the whole concept of remembering here is a bit tricky because it's not my memories to remember. However, they kind of are. I think Kristen Hirsch came up with the term post memory, where it's kind of like a generational memory that gets passed down, even though you don't personally experience it. So I think that was the case for me. But even then, there's a hesitation, like it's not me remembering, but it kind of is. So it's like a hesitation, like remember, like I'm trying to remember it, but it's not quite there. So there's that aspect to it, but it's also, I guess, as a result, what happens is that I'm like membering, like taking members of different things and putting them together, which also the member list at the end kind of speaks to that. Like it's just a bunch of places and names that I'm trying to piece together to form this like memory, so to speak. So I think, yeah, the disconnect in the words speaks to my disconnect with Palestine, with these Palestinian women, with these stories, but also that desire to kind of connect them back together, to member them back together. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm curious if you could just talk a little bit about your process of revision and specifically, like, when did you know that this book was done?
That's a great question. Maybe I don't even think it's done. It's crazy to say, it's already published, it has a cover, it has a back cover, and but I mean, for the revision process, uh, it was about, stepping away from it for a little while, coming back, rereading, rearranging. A lot of this was about rearranging because, should I put this line before the next one or after? I had a lot of freedom there, so it was a lot of, I have the words there, but how can I arrange them so that they complement each other in the best way? And how did I know it was finished? I mean, I don't think for me this is terrible advice because I mean, it's just a personal thing, but you just feel it, You feel that I've said what I wanted to say and you kind of just look at it and it gives you a sense of peace. But at the same time, I think I ended the book with the word beginning. So I think I was trying to avoid the feeling of, ending it at all. So I kind of like, yeah, I avoided that problem there. But yeah, it's just a feeling, I think, where you step away and you think it said what it needed to say and that's it.
It was such a beautiful quote to end on, and I did want to talk a bit about that. So the specific quote was, "I will tell you the story from the beginning." And I'm just wondering if you could speak a bit about the decision to end the book on a quote, and that specific quote in particular.
Right. I mean, I think I knew I wanted to end with a phrase from one of the testimonies as opposed to my own sort of last word. It just felt right. It felt right to give them the last word in that sense because so much of this project depended upon these stories. So ending on that voice was important to me. And to end at the beginning, I think goes back to that feeling of hope. And I think by the end of the book, for me, I at least had a story now, like my own story. And yes, it's like a patchwork of other people's stories. Yes, it's something that came out of witnessing so many different perspectives, but it's kind of my own story now that I can at least carry with me and try to articulate. So that's the story, I guess, that ends there with that line. And also there's like this cyclicality where, you end at the beginning, you kind of want to go back and reread and sort of see how did we get to this point. So I like that. It was like a never-ending kind of questioning of, identity and where one stands within this context.
Yeah, I love that. Do you have a favorite poem within the book?
I think it might be that last one, just because, like I said, I feel like if you read the book from beginning to end, at least for me, I see this now, but at the beginning, it was kind of like a struggle. I don't know if it comes across, but like I was still trying to get into the way, the form and the way I was going about this, and it was more reactionary and questioning. But as the poems go on, especially in the last two poems, there's a more of a flow to it. I got the hang of it a little bit more. I was interacting with the testimony material a bit more freely, like I said. So that last poem, I think, includes some of the powerful back and forth sections that I think really sum up the book in an effective way.
What do you most hope people take away from reading the book?
I hope people realize that the Palestinian context, the branches of its context, reach across time and space. They reach from the Nakba and the pre-Nakba period to now and to tomorrow and to forever. They reach from Palestine to Canada to the States to Europe to Syria. This is an issue that touches so many in so many places, and as long as you witness at least this story, then you are also now a part of this context. You know what I mean? You can't just take now these stories that you've heard and sort of go about your day without asking yourself, okay, well, what do I do with this information now? How does this change my perspective now? What's my next move within this web that I am now caught in, you know? I hope that's the takeaway for anyone who reads the book.
That's a great response. I think that will really resonate with people.
Have you had the chance yet to do any readings from this book? And if so, how did you structure it?
I haven't had many opportunities, but during my graduation, my grad degree, I did a few readings as like the thesis project was sort of in process, and I tested it out at a few readings. And I think I make sure to begin with explaining sort of the structure of the book so people know what to expect. And I try to choose a section where the two columns are complementary to each other in a way that can be heard, I guess, if spoken out loud. So maybe like a section from that last poem record or record, or the beginning in Discord, the first poem, where it was my first encounter with the testimonial material. It's a bit more easy to understand. I get the back and forth that's happening, so I'll choose a section from there. And then just in the way I pronounce and the way I read and the intonation, and I try to make sure it's clear when I start something, when I end something, and try to differentiate between my tones when reading either column. So hopefully that helps the readers understand a little bit what's going on.
On a somewhat related note, can you give our viewers a writing prompt based on Umbilical Discord?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's very, very simple to give one based off of this book, because all you have to do is just choose any material, written material, or even a conversation. Or actually, how about this? Go ask a family member or a close friend to recount to you a story from their life that has stuck with them, and record what they say. Type it probably is faster, easier. And you can record also like the content, like where are they? Where are you guys sitting? Is this a face-to-face conversation? What are their reactions? What does their voice sound like? Everything. Write all that down. And then from that document, just start your own kind of back and forth poetic form where you react to or juxtapose or complement that material. And voila, you'll have a little mini umbilical discord form to work with. It's very interesting. You could use like, even another book or another poem. It's really endless, the amount of poetry that can come from this form.
I love that idea. I feel like I should do that tonight. I'm curious if you could talk more generally about the writers who inspire you.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like I said, it was only at that grad level where I started reading works by Palestinians like Muhammad al-Kurd. So I'm very new. I'm very new to this realm. I found his work very inspiring. Fadi Jouda, another writer who was one of the judges and co-founder of the Etel Adnan Prize. I'm still at the beginning of, like I said, just being exposed to this new world of literature. My studies were all, English literature, British literature. It's all very new to me, but so far, yeah, these are sort of the names. Hayan Sharara, the other co-founder of the prize. These are the names that come to mind, yeah.
Can you talk a bit about the submission process and how you came to apply for the Etel Adnan Prize?
Right, yeah. And again, because everything was so new to me at that grad level, embarrassingly, I only heard of the prize through my supervisor when it came time to sort of submit my project to different publishers. But I mean, regardless, it was, I thought it was a wonderful prize to submit to. I submitted sort of a shortened version of my master's thesis and heard back a few months later that they chose my manuscript, and that I won the prize, and it was just an absolute pleasure working with the team and with Fadi and Hayan, and it kind of opened a new door for me to get into this type of literature and to check out the previous prize winners and to read their books, and so it's been really, really great.
In the foreword, Trish Sala writes that this book both is and enacts an extraordinary work of epical witnessing. Later, you write, birthdays depend on witness. Can you talk a bit about what it means to be a witness and how poetry allows us to witness?
That's a very deep question. I mean, when you witness something, I think it's impossible to dissociate yourself from that thing. It becomes a part of you in a way. You know, every time you hear a story, every time you see something, you have this responsibility of, well, what do I do now with that information? And I think, especially in the Palestinian context, so much of what we know depends on witness, depends on listening to the stories of our parents, our grandparents, or elder Palestinian women online, you know, the same way that, you know, no one witnesses their own birth. Well, you kind of do, but no one remembers it. You have to trust that the people around you sort of like recorded that date and time. And then you come to know, like, yeah, I was born on that day. I trust these sources around me. And sort of the same thing kind of happens, especially because many of us Palestinians in the diaspora, this is all the access that we have now to the moment of the Nakba, to the years before that. We depend on this witnessing to understand the context that is ongoing, right? And so it's very important, I think, in my writing and poetry in general, it's a very powerful tool to be able to interact with those stories, take on those stories now as a responsibility. And it's, again, what do we do now with that information? That's the important question.
You've already spoken on this a little bit, but can you talk more about how you managed to navigate the challenge of writing poetry from diaspora?
Yeah, like I said, I really felt, especially because it was all new to me, you know, I'd never written about this before, never from this perspective or at all in general, you know, just first time being exposed to this information and these writers and this context. And so that in and of itself was a little bit daunting. And I think there's that feeling, at least for me, where, you know, it's like, what do I have to say? Right? Like I don't know what it's like to live in Palestine. I don't know what it's like to even go through the hardships that they're going through, you know? Like I'm reading Muhammad al-Kurd's Rifqa, trying you know, to say that I have a connection with this writer when I know that living in Canada or now in the States is nothing compared to living in occupied Palestine, right? So there was that feeling of I feel like what I have to say is not worthy, you know? But coming to the realization too that so many of us Palestinians are in my situation, right? Where we're living in the diaspora, we haven't been to Palestine, but we're connected, we're still connected. And that's sort of, it's important, you know, because like I mentioned in the book, even like host country is hereditary, you know, like we learn from our parents, oh, I'm Syrian because I was born there, they were born there, but their parents were born in Palestine. And if we forget that, then I think we risk sort of losing that collective connection that we have to Palestine and to our desire to return to Palestine and to free Palestine. So it's getting over that hurdle and realizing that no, what I have from my perspective as someone living in the diaspora is important. And so trying to realize that was the first step in writing it down, I think.
Speaking in general, a lot of my students are asking this question, and I think a lot of writers in general are asking this question. What can poetry offer us in 2025?
Oh man, I wish I could ask your students that or ask you that and see what you have to say as well. If I can be like completely honest, and I think this is one of the reasons why I've kind of taken a break from writing and this might be something that you cut later from the video and the interview, but the last year of what's been happening in Gaza has completely obliterated everything that I thought was important. In the sense that, you know, even in the process of publishing this book, I couldn't help but feel like, you know, what's the point? Who is this going to help? What is this going to do? And I think that's maybe maybe it's unnatural. I don't know. Maybe it's just me, but I really felt disheartened. You feel helpless. You feel like nothing is going to change anything. But at the same time, I know it's like a billion drops of water that really pushes the wave that will make a lasting change. And I guess for me too, like from an Islamic perspective, for me, I know that in the end, our efforts in anything in life are nothing without the help of God. That's just a personal perspective. And so as long as your intention and whatever you do, even writing, poetry, prose, whatever it is, as long as your intention is pure and for a cause that you think is worthy and valuable, just putting that effort forward, and God will do the rest, you know? That's my perspective on it. It's kind of the rope that I hold on to in these times. So I it's hard to ignore that feeling of helplessness, especially when it comes to, for me, like a form like poetry. You really feel like, you know, who's listening? But someone will. So I think it really has the power to push the action of God, I suppose, you know, God's sort of intervention. Yeah.
All I can say to that is that I'm incredibly grateful that I got a chance to read your book, especially at this moment in time. So I don't know if that helps or anything, but I will just say that I feel incredibly grateful that I was introduced to your work and that I'm talking to you now. So I totally understand the feeling of like, oh gosh, what does it all mean? What am I doing? But I, for one, as a reader of your work, I'm very grateful for your book.
Thank you. And that's beyond amazing to hear. I appreciate that so much. I'm so grateful for you and for you, Hiba. Thank you.
Yeah, ditto what Kathleen said. I'm kind of choking up.
Aw.
But yeah, no, that's beautiful.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for your work. I want to make sure that we touch on the audience question, and it's slightly more fun. So
Good, that's good.
it's actually from my husband,
Oh,
who is also a translator.
wow. Perfect for each other.
He can't translate me. I'm just kidding.
Oh, wow. That's a whole other podcast. We'll talk about that later.
What's your favorite untranslatable word, phrase, or idiom, if any?
That's so fun. Oh man, I feel like I don't have enough experience as a translator to kind of come up with a good one. One thing that's like, it's translatable, like you can say it literally in English, but it's not the same. It's not like a phrase that we have, where in Arabic you say like nishif dammi, like my blood dried up. It's like pure like fear, terror, you know, that kind of, I guess it kind of translates in a way, but it's just it doesn't hit the same, you know, as that phrase in Arabic. That's one I think that comes to mind. Also, there's like this Palestinian like folk tune that's actually in the book, where for the life of me I tried to find like the translation of this phrase that we all say. Everyone says ala dal'una, ala dal'una. Everyone sings it. Everyone I ask, family member, anyone, someone no one knows what it means. I'm like, what do you mean you don't know it? Like we all sing it, don't we? You know? And eventually I found like some translation online where it means help us, why didn't you help me? But in my head I'm like, are you sure? Like I don't think that's what it, but you know what? I'll go with that. So that's another phrase I think that if anyone knows it, reach out to me, you know? But yeah.
Thank you so much, Rawand. This was so awesome, and I can't wait to share it. And I'm going to share it next week, inshallah.
Perfect. Can't wait. So excited. Thank you so much, both of you. Excited to keep in touch and hopefully hear more about your individual kind of works too.
Thank you, and take care, please.
I will. You too. Have a great one, guys.
You too.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.